So, hello, my friends, and welcome to Postscript. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and we've got an interview today with Harlan Emil Gruber, who is going to be one of our speakers at the Transition Talks on the 22nd of March here in Berkeley Springs. Hi, Harlan. Nice to see you. Nice to have you with us.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome to Postscript. What we want to do here is just chat for about a half an hour about what you've been thinking about because you're an interesting guy. You've been doing a lot of very fascinating kind of things, and I'd love for you to talk about a little bit about the kind of the basis, the theory. What's the underpinnings of what you've been doing all these years?
All right. Well, yeah, I always like to start off by saying the biggest inspiration in my life is Buckminster Fuller,
Mm.
who, what an incredible genius. And when I came across his book, the first book I saw of his was Synergetics, which is, an extremely dense, complicated book that he wrote towards the end of his life that's kind of like indexed with numbers. And he actually coined the word synergy, which means that the combination of the parts is unprecedented by each individual part. And the whole book called Synergetics, Explorations in the Geometry of Thinking, both physical and metaphysical. But ultimately, and I dove in and I read most of his books that he's ever written. Most notably and most accessible was his book, Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. And
Mm.
his overarching goal with all this, explorations, which was very, very dense in talking about geometry and great circles and breaking down how the universe operates, was ultimately something very simple, which is just that we can, as humans, can inhabit the earth in the most harmonious, beautiful, and sacred way without offense to anything. And right now, that's not how humans interact with the earth. We have, do a lot of detriment as we see, and not everyone is benefiting equally. And his vision was that all humans could live a standard of life better than the wealthiest people now if we just cooperate with the way the universe operates. And his biggest premise, though, was to switch from weaponry to livingry. If we use the amount of money and resources used to in create weapons and the military to just provide for everyone and build the earth, we could do it like that. And so, like I say, you know, to answer the
So,
question
so,
shortly,
so
Buckminster Fuller.
Harlan, let me just insert right in here for our viewers that what Harlan is just what you have just said is the essence of what we're trying to do here at Transition Talks and at the Arlington Institute. We're thinking about the structure and the operation of a new world, and you probably more than anyone I know at least have started to take some of those principles and put them literally into practicality, like the imagery that's behind your head right now of new versions of way we can all live, and that's what's going to be so interesting. So keep going, please.
And just as an easy way to transition to the next most inspiring important. So now, mind you, I learned about Buckminster Fuller when I was around 20 years old, which would be 1979. And shortly thereafter, I moved to New York City, and I happened to walk into a gallery that had an image, and you could see this is very similar to the image I just had behind me, which was a AI generated image that I just created recently. But this is a drawing that was done in the 60s by the Italian architect Paolo Soleri, and it's called an arcology, which is integrating architecture and ecology into what he conceived of as these three-dimensional megastructure cities. Now, I lived in New York City for a good part of my life, which of course is a very dense city with very tall buildings. But actually, most of the land is given over to cars and streets. And then all these really tall buildings, you can't go into them unless you have access to them. So they're not really open to the public. His idea is to build one giant megastructure, taking out all the cars, putting in more pedestrian and other ways to move around it that makes sense in this giant building, but have it fully integrated ecologically. So you're not just living in some big cement building, but you're living in this beautiful, lush, ecological environment. And he called his book that was published in 1969 by MIT Press Arcology, City in the Image of Man. And he was proposing that cities would grow like a living organism. And so that's what really set me on my focus and life's path. I'm going to switch back because, I'll
Right.
just briefly talk about this new background, which I'm working on actually making more of these ideas. But this is the idea of an arcology that I asked the Chat GPT to generate. And I haven't worked with Midjourney, and that's what I'm looking to work with another AI to create these ideas just to inspire people. I'm not thinking that this is actually exactly what we're going to build, but you get by looking at it, you can see this integration of the way we build and live homes, but into a three-dimensional, organic, living,
Right.
growing city. So that's the overarching premise of what I was inspired to do way back then.
Right.
And like you say, it aligns with transition talk. So I'm so grateful to be talking
Yeah.
to you about this today.
So you're an artist and a sculptor and an architect, right? And that's the kind of progression that gets you to these marvelous kind of ideas.
So I never got an architecture degree, but I did was inspired to go to Parsons School of Design, which at that time did not have an architectural department. They only added that after I left. What they had was called environmental design, and that was basically a pre-architecture kind of department. And a lot of people in that studio that got the undergraduate degree went on to get architectural degrees. And I actually looked into getting a master's in architecture after I left at the Southern California Institute of Architecture. And I'll get back to that in a moment. But with my environmental design degree, what happened is some people came to speak at the school that were making art furniture, which was like a
Hmm.
whole movement in the 80s. And there was an art gallery in New York City that showed only art furniture. These people had their work collected in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and other museums and galleries. So that's in the 80s into the early 90s. I worked on making these vibrationally advanced. Now, mind you, besides being inspired by Buckminster Fuller and Paolo Solari, my entire life I've been aligned with these very forward thinking ideas like new age, let's call it, is a more appropriate term, of that we're in a time of great shift and that the consciousness is shifting on the planet. And to that end, I was reading books along the lines of the starseed transmission, that's channeled Pleiadian information. And that's kind of very an interesting point that I'll get to in that while I was studying at Parsons, I designed this unusual shape that was all based on the golden ratio. And I was always thinking I could kind of maybe make it into a piece of furniture or something, but it didn't make sense as a piece of furniture. And so then finally, after the art furniture kind of fizzled out, and I was kind of like up in the air, and I decided to move from New York to Taos, New Mexico. These large interactive sculptures that people can climb on and interact with, it made me think about that shape that I designed back in the mid 80s when I was studying design, but also, like I said, reading ideas about that. And here we are in front of the diamond portal. So this was this golden ratio shape that I thought of then. And I actually then decided to build it and bring it to Burning Man. And I called this the diamond portal because it's diamond in like a playing card diamond, right? But it's a rhombus would be the correct geometrical term for that, but everyone knows what a diamond looks like on a playing card. And then the portal, because it has this hole going right through it. So the diamond portal came into being in 2004 as this 16-foot tall structure. And at Burning Man, which is laid out like a clock, you can tell where your camp is or where your art is by the time on the clock. And so as soon as I thought about bringing this there, I said, it's got to be at 11:11. And a lot of people see the digital 11:11 as kind of like this wake up code or some kind of sign that you're, tuning in. So piece is known as the 11:11 Diamond Portal, built for Burning Man in 2004. And Burning Man in 2004 was much less art and much more open space. Like you could see on either side, there was like nothing. And I placed the piece a mile out, and you could easily see it in the distance. Now at Burning Man, if you put something a mile out, there'd be 100 things in front of it, and you'd have to go out to see it. But it was wide open. And then the final, well, two final keys. I'll talk about the color. That green color came to me as a vision through a DMT experience that communicated with me in colors. And this was in the 90s. And I didn't understand the color at the time, but that color meant something to me. And when I was designing and building the diamond portal, I'm like, what color should I make it? The first color that came to mind was flat black, like the monolith in 2001. Just make
Yeah.
it black. But that black is going to get all dusty. It's going to be hot. It's going to look weird, all black. And while I was thinking of that, in my design studio where I was fabricating it was a panel of this color just hanging up because I had externalized this color to see it. I wanted to see this chartreuse rich green. So I was just like, I'll just make it the green. Well, what I didn't know is that this opening, and you could kind of start to see it, but at a closer angle, it actually makes a heart shape. And green is the color of the heart chakra. And then, as Dan Winter and Heart Math Institute talks about and makes devices, when your heart rhythms and EKG are in golden ratio, that's when you're in a state of coherence, into a state of bliss. So golden ratio relates to the heart. This green relates to the heart. The shape actually makes a heart. And so without any intention, I created this fully heart chakra based installation. And then the final key to it is that I play bass guitar. I've been into bass guitar since I'm a kid, into all the rock music from the 60s, Jimi Hendrix, the Grateful Dead, the Who, loud, heavy rock. That was my thing with a bass guitar, to rock out. Jefferson Airplane, that's a good one. So actually, in between going to Parsons and when I first went to school, I actually first went and was studying physics and electrical engineering because of my interest in music. And then I dropped out to form a new wave rock band in the early 80s before I finally went back for my environmental design degree. And late one night, I'm getting my bass playing really loud. I'm like, what's the lowest note that the bass will feed back? And I leaned the bass against the amplifier and tuned the strings down till they were so slack that if you were to pluck them, they wouldn't make a sound. They would just go blah and stop. But because they're on this amplifier, forcing them to feed back, they kept resonating. And I got this sound to come out that was just not a musical note, but a rumbling, purring, almost engine or helicopter going like bubble, 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 bubble. And it was random. It would build up and die down in these weird pulsations. And so I actually did some performances around New York City in the 80s and 90s where I made an installation of this sound. And people would see it. It was at different events or parties. And it would just be like, oh, that's interesting. Whatever. It's just going blah, blah, blah. It wasn't until Burning Man when I hit it inside of this sculpture. And so when you went up to the sculpture and touched it and climbed up the ladder that was on one side, you felt these subtle vibrations vibrating it. And every sculpture since then has, and I gave, back when I invented it, I came up with a poetic name for it. I call it the Quazar Wave Transducer. And I've always been into astronomy ever since I'm a little kid. I
Yeah.
always wanted to know about the planets and galaxies. And as a little kid in the 60s, learning about this stuff, quasars were a newly discovered, most distant, most powerful astronomical object, the closest ones being billions of light years away, and the most distant ones on the edge of the observable universe. And they good at put out the power of an entire galaxy. And they're now, back when they were first discovered, they didn't really know what they were, which is where the name quasar comes from, quasi-stellar radio source, because most of their energy was in a radio spectrum, not the light spectrum. Now, now if you look up what a quasar is, they say it's a galaxy that is putting out energy in the radio spectrum. But anyway, cool thing, cool name. So the idea is that the quasar wave transducer is transducing these most distant, most powerful energies in the universe into a tangible form. I'm not saying that's what it does, but what it does do, and I have met and shown it to the physicist Nassim Haramein at one of the events I was at, it is just a feedback device that's feeding back both on itself, but also open to external influence. And I've seen different people come or go, and it changes. So it kind of activates. It's kind of like the engine inside these portals. So that's what set me on the path of the last 20 years of building these sculptural installations with the intent to, I both call this a key to shift the earth into the next dimension, but after building several others and the way that they work and what they're based on, there are spaces for the evolution of consciousness. The intent is that people go experience the sound, the color, the shape, and it helps create an environment that will help
Sure.
align their consciousness to become aligned with seeing everything as sacred and living in harmony with the earth.
Okay, so now this is interesting. So, how did you make the transition from large scale art installations that people can climb on and get inside of and so on? How did that move toward kind of a multifamily housing, mixed use housing and projects?
So in a way, it's the other way around in that I was always interested in this idea of building these cities and arcology and Buckminster Fuller. And I'm not able to, and I never really, I shouldn't say not able, but I never really did pursue drawing, working with that, trying to get that to happen. I kind of got sidetracked into doing this because this is something I can do with my time and my abilities. But ultimately, the intention of all these is to awaken this consciousness to do that. And so right now, I'm in the transition of moving back to focusing on, and I'll just might as well bring it back up because that is my ultimate goal and what I'm really wanting to work on, this idea of inspiring people. Like I feel like my goal isn't so much to be the actual designer, although I do have this one particular design that I started working on back in the 80s by combining these ideas of arcology and John Michel, who's this incredible author that wrote a book called New View over Atlantis and Dimensions of Paradise that goes into the ideas of the Earth's ley lines and units of measurement. And this Dimensions of Paradise talks about a particular diagram that's called the heavenly city. So I combine those into this idea of a 12 spiral city that I've been thinking about, and I, talk about, show images, and have a whole chapter in my book on, as far as being a designer of what a three-dimensional future city could look like. But what I really feel I my calling is to inspire people to share these ideas with as many people as possible so that they could be like, wow, just like I was when I walked into that gallery and saw Paolo Solari's drawings. And I was like, wow, this is what I want to see happen in the world. I kind of want to help kindle that fire in other people.
Well, this is very interesting because we're moving into a period of time of extraordinary change. That's kind of self-evident, and it's accelerating. It's almost in an exponential kind of way. And what it means is that there is going to be a new world that's going to emerge out of this. And it's going to be new and it's going to be really different. And it's going to be the product of literally a new human that thinks differently and understands who they are in different terms and how the larger reality works. And that then translates into all kinds of systems and architecture and a variety, almost every aspect of life gets influenced by how you think and what your values are and what your principles are. And so, what you're doing here is really quite interesting in very practical terms of starting to take some of these sacred geometric concepts that underpin the rest of reality and translating them into some new ideas in terms of how we can all live.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up quickly. This was an image generated that's in my book showing this idea of this 12 spiral city, but you could see it's a very crude computer generated one where the buildings look more like prisons. What the idea is to combine the picture I had behind me, which is more the organic, with this way of structuring. And I'm going to switch this back because this doesn't fully embody it, but it is this idea that you build a megastructure that spirals up. And like I say, this is not really capturing it. And I want to touch base though, but you know, this does capture the more organic ideas I have, but still not exactly what I think we will be doing. The idea, though, and what you were just saying, is ultimately the most important. It's the consciousness. It's the way we think. It's not what a city looks like that we could build. That is secondary. That's what will come from humanity waking up to realizing that we have this potential. And if we were to shift, like Buckminster Fuller said, all of our resources from weaponry to livingry, and then we also shift the consciousness to regard everything as sacred, our whole physical creation, and work with it in the most beautiful, sacred, even magical way. And that's the underlying thing, though, is the consciousness. And that's how come I feel like I went on the path of building the interactive portal installations, because that is addressing this, hopefully. And I have to say, the portals have had a good degree of success. There's been quite a number of people that I've met who've told me about their experience of their consciousness actually shifting. My favorite story is someone back in the first few years when I finally built this big sky blue sapphire portal that was an incredible environment. Right after that, someone contacted me from Detroit and said, I have to thank you so much. I've been going to all of your portals at Burning Man, and now I live in Detroit. I've started the Detroit Evolutionary Laboratory, and we host urban farming, yoga classes. We show zeitgeist movies, and we're doing everything we can to share this new consciousness. And I was like, oh well, I guess you were always into that. He goes, no, before I sat in your portal, I just had to get a job and do this, and now that I had this experience, it's truly shifted my approach. And that's just one example. I've had maybe a dozen or so people
That's
share that, and that's the tip of the iceberg. If those dozen told me about it, there's probably other
yeah,
people that this
there
is
there are
affecting
for
as well.
sure. And you've written a marvelous book. Do you have a copy of it around there, perchance?
Let's see, where would be the copy? Back, yes, it's close, but I'll disappear and I'll hold it up because it does look great holding it up.
as he as he disappears into the vertical uh,
Let's see, there's a copy.
the vertical city.
That's
That's
the
quite
very
an
first one.
interesting kind of
Okay, boom, boom. And
area.
even with my, let's see if I hold it, I have to go like that. There it is. And actually, so this book though is available on my website as a
Well,
PDF.
you're gonna. I hope you'll bring some with you
I'm going
to
to bring some. And then what you don't
Berkeley
get on the
Springs.
PDF is this really cool foil embossed hardcover underneath, which I really love.
It's a
But yeah,
great book.
yeah.
I have a
And
copy of it, and I
that
like
works
it.
pretty good. So, and of course, I use my iconic 1111 diamond portal, and I only printed 1111 copies, 1,111 copies, of
A
which
limited edition for sure.
I think, yes, this is, yeah. Anyway, they're all signed and numbered. So, yeah. And like I say, though, my ultimate goal is to share the information. And that's why if you go to portal to thenewearth.com and you can click to view the PDF and you can easily access the book as a PDF online. And of course, you can acquire one of these limited edition hardcovers if you really want a beautiful printed book. And it's a nice
Yeah,
size. It's 10 by 7, so a little bigger than normal. Lots of
it's a very
photos in
nice
it.
it's a very nice book. I can
Thank you so much.
I can guarantee that. And so we're really looking forward to having you with us on the 22nd of March. And we'll start at 9:30 in the morning here in Berkeley Springs, which is just 100 miles from Washington and Baltimore. You can find, for those of our viewers, they can find out all the information on arlingtoninstitute.org or transitiontalks.org. And your presentation will kind of walk through this whole evolution. What's really intriguing to me, of course, I'm an engineer, but it should be of interest to almost everyone, is how these basic concepts like the tree of life and the different platonic solids and sacred geometry and all of these things then translate into uh, uh, physical living kind of situations. I mean, I look at behind you at this marvelous uh, kind of vertical city or living environment that's behind your head. And I noticed that there are no straight lines in the thing. The whole thing has got all curves, which are very organic and things. And so that may well be the future about how we all live together, because it's really going to be quite different. And so you are a bit of a prospector or or someone that's out in front who is uh, generating these kind of new ideas, and it's really going to be fun to have you with us, and we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And of course, I do have the morning session, which I think is a good 2 hours. So I will
Yeah,
be able to go through. And as the book says, let's see, will it show up? Well, it's on the cover. Sound, sacred geometry, earth grid energies, and for personal and planetary transformation. So it's kind of quite a smorgasbord of information. Like you mentioned, I'll go into three-dimensional geometries, which references the Sim-Harriman structure of the vacuum. Anyway, it's going to be great. I love to have a lot of stuff, so
yeah,
it's something for everyone kind of thing. But then mostly we'll get into the visionary designs, and I do reference quite a number of other visionary architects to put together
yeah.
these ideas. So thank you.
It's going to be great. And then, by the way, Robert Edward Grant will be with us in the afternoon, and so it's a marvelous kind of day to come out either to Berkeley Springs or it'll be live streamed. And so no matter where you are in the world, you'll be able to see this thing. So check it out at transitiontalks.org. And Harlan, so nice to meet you this way and talk about what you're going to do and what you're going to say when you come to Berkeley Springs. And we're very much looking forward to having you with us.
Yes, John, thank you so much. It's going to be an incredible day and really looking forward to it. And it's great, like you say, that it'll be live streamed so that we'll promote this and I think we're going to have a really good turnout. So
Yeah.
appreciate it. And in person is going to be even better. Okay,
Yep.
see you then.
So thanks so much, and we'll see you all.